Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're going to be starting off the new year discussing one of Sega Genesis' most highly regarded vertical shoot 'em ups that surprisingly didn't sell compared to its competitors back at release. This would also become a classic in retrospect, though also tough to find with its low sales numbers. We're checking out Metallic Uniframe Super Hybrid Armor, better known as M.U.S.H.A, developed by Compile and published by Tulpan in the Japanese region, and Seismic in the US, released to the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive in 1991. Typically when this game comes up, it's often in good regard, aside from its current price for original copies. To circumvent that, we're going to be playing the Switch Virtual Console version. Let's hop on the mech suit and check out the story real quick. In the 91st century, or the year 2290 depending on which manual you're reading, man has established colonies in space. Though one day the environmental control system malfunctions and its core, known as the Dire 51, begins to attack. As it launches a full-scale offensive on the orbital colonies, it begins targeting Earth. Once the Dire 51 supercomputer develops its own armor, the attacks heighten as it becomes sentient and hell-bent on the destruction of humanity. A lone mechanical fighter is all that stands between Dire 51 and an intergalactic struggle for the fate of mankind. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 2D vertical shoot 'em up that's easy to learn but difficult to master. You'll battle through 7 stages as you begin your assault on the enemy's mobile fortress, leading up to scrapping Dire 51 itself. You have several flight speeds you can set along with several formations on your options. You've also got 4 special weapons you can upgrade up to 4 times by collecting the same color icon. You can alternate between your special and primary weapons, or fire both at the same time, which is highly recommended to cut through Dire 51's robotic army. Throughout each stage, you'll blast as many enemies as you can until you defeat each stage's mid and main boss. Along the way, certain crafts will fly through carrying chips that will strengthen your options and build up your reserves. You can also get extends fairly often as long as you keep smoking the robot ops and keep your mech suit in the air. The power-ups will replace whatever you have equipped and maintain the weapon level so long as it's above level 1. If you pick up new weapons on power level 1, they will stay there until you pick up the same icon again. At times you may want to avoid certain upgrades depending on what you're trying to run. Enemies will straight up mob you as the game goes on, and M.U.S.H.A moves at a steady clip from jump. One hit is all it takes to lose a ship, and losing all of your chips will send you back to the beginning of the stage and reset your score. You can take an extra hit with a weapon equipped, but will lose it once damaged and lose a power level. If you get hit again, that will also cost you a ship. Some may argue about the difficulty of this game, which isn't unreasonable, but that will depend on who you ask. Once you learn enemy and boss attacks and can clear the game without using continues, you'll cruise through this in about 35 minutes. It's not to say there won't be points where you'll get smoked like a pack of cools, because most certainly will until everything clicks in about what your craft can do and what your enemies are capable of. While there are more difficult shoot 'em ups on the Sega Genesis, M.U.S.H.A is a very fun and snappy title that will keep you locked in until you reach the final encounter. This is a fairly forgiving shooter, but to get high scores you have to keep your craft formidable, and that will take a few attempts to dial everything in. Getting to the last 2 stages will be the most challenging as you battle the floating armadas and eventually Dire 51 itself. Crowd control becomes very important on the back end, and staying powered up with your choice of sidearms make this much easier to manage. You'll certainly feel the difference between the easy and normal modes, but overall, even with the game's difficult parts, it's generous with your relatively small hitbox, and at times multiple hits you can take before taking it down. Boss encounters start off pretty standard, where bullet hurting will make these encounters kind of simple if you can see what to do. Battles later on do get spicy with damage phases and battles that will throw a healthy amount of projectiles on screen as well. Here, if you can quickly discern the projectiles you can destroy and the ones you have to avoid, you can cut through some of these encounters pretty swiftly, especially if you have level 4 weapons. The final encounter with Dire 51's core becomes an escape sequence that requires you to get a barrier pattern down or get smoked at the finish line. A mech suit will fly and try to get you at the very end, but once you down it and dock with the lunar station, the credits begin to roll. Graphics-wise, M.U.S.H.A runs on a 4MB cartridge and was developed in a little less than a year. This is part of the Alesta series of shoot 'em ups that spans several consoles and universe, though this is connected with its overall timeline. The original style of the Alesta games to that point is present alongside the feudal-era Japan aesthetic. This, along with its sequel, Robo Alesta, lean into this and create some interesting enemies and set pieces, while pushing the hardware to points until then were mostly seen in arcades. For an early Genesis title, M.U.S.H.A pulls off some impressive visuals along with the breakneck pacing. Stages at first will have their similarities with their past works like the Power Strike games and Zenek, though even from the rip you'll see it become a combination of concepts that all meld in some badass backdrops like the iconic floor panel scene and the valleys where you hurl up until the Dire 51 HQ. Level designs have multiple layers of parallax scrolling, and these are highly detailed, like the mountainous valleys battling an airship fleet to the inner workings of Dire 51's secret weapons facility. Levels will go by quickly but are highly cinematic as you move through the clouds and lava-filled caverns. Stages also have unique hazards like the cave wall sides and the moving pistons of the arms facility. Even with everything going on in the background, the performance rarely suffers as a result, displaying upwards of a dozen sprites at a time and often not skipping a beat. Sprites are of various sizes, with your sprite being huge amongst all the enemies on screen. Enemies can spawn from several planes here, which is pretty sick and leaving a silhouette that you can spot below the clouds and the flames. When the majors start coming into the fray, you'll see some gigantic mechanical creations, and these designs lead into the Edo period aesthetic with mechanical pagodas and ceremonial masks that split into orbital lasers. Along with the mechanical enemies, enemies, you see some pretty neat designs and see it all morph into something even crazier as the game goes on. Boss designs are a marvel, with several of them being huge screen fillers in tandem with the visuals going on in the background. The first couple boss encounters are more man and machine style fusion, leading to the more mechanical Oni aesthetic later on, which all looks sick here. Once you get to the Dire 51 encounter, its giant computer husk housing an intergalactic hive mind is a set of visuals that really leaves an impression. The opening cutscene is in the vein of games like Valis, Gaiaris, and even Glaylancer that all essentially have anime intros. Even the opening splash screen shows a mecha suit battle underway, so again, the visuals are a strong suit here. The opening scene is about a minute long and it's pretty impressive overall. The ending sequences will have a similar introduction, and much like Konami's M.U.S.H.A, the ending will be a little bit more detailed depending on the difficulty it's cleared. Sound-wise, M.U.S.H.A absolutely shreds with a high-energy soundtrack that stays relentless until the last chord. Toshiaki Sakota lays down a half hour of power, with each track having a metal influence, weaving in the rhythms and signatures of the Edo period. What's sick is that Sakota composed on live instruments and then used MSX computers to notate the sounds before converting the tracks to the PC 9800. In short, the tracks rip as you blast through the game's run, and it stays hype, leading into the conclusion that sounds like a Seder icon interlude once the credits and space junk begin to roll. In-game audio is nice and punchy with some pronounced sound bites as you mow through the Dire 51 ops. Explosions as you down bigger enemies have a nice thump, while the smaller enemies have a pop. The fanfare of getting another stock has a ring to it, while the sound of losing an option will quickly become mainstays as you move forward. The sound work, much like the graphics, push the Genesis hardware to make some proper noise, creating some really cool stuff that only a handful of developers really nailed as much as Compile does here. To sum it all up, M.U.S.H.A is a great game, that much is certain. The only real downside to this is the price and the arguable difficulty curve. This is a fun shoot 'em up to learn, and once you wrap your head around how to maximize your attacks and what special weapons you like, you can put in some work against the Dire 51 and company. While some of the environmental hazards may smoke you a few times, once you figure out the patterns, you'll dance through many of these without much of a problem. For more experienced players, the higher difficulties are recommended since it does add more hit points to the enemies and make them a bit more aggressive. M.U.S.H.A gets an 8.5 out of 10 and comes recommended to shoot 'em up fans and fans of visually striking games like Geki Renden, which we talked about last video. Outside of a few small things, this game is a certified banger. It would be great if it were a little more accessible for physical carts, but there are digital outlets that make it possible to play for cheaper. It has its moments when it gets spicy, but it's a generous and forgiving game for those who want to learn something new and get some exposure to the Alessa series, which is full of awesome games. The price is often a talking point here, considering this is one of the most expensive cartridges in the Genesis and Mega Drive library. The US version goes for about $270 loose and is north of $600 for complete copies, and the Japanese import goes for $125 loose and north of $300 for complete copies at the time of this recording. Is it worth getting a physical cartridge of this? I don't know, that depends on who you ask and what level of disposable income they have. But for everyone else, this is part of the Sega Genesis expansion pack on the Switch, which is $50 annually and is far more accessible with way more to play if you're interested. Otherwise, play this one however you can, as this is a great experience that shoot 'em up fans, regardless of skill, will likely enjoy. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, that's awesome, glad to use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.